Weekly looks at the legality of the proposed takeover of the Rivers State House of Assembly by the National Assembly. Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Professor Fidelis Odita, is our guest on the program. Also showing is the early reactions trailing the release of former Chief Security Officer Major Hamza Al-Mustafa after 14 years in prison. All that and more coming up on the program today, but let's begin first with a recap of the top legal stories. I'm Shola Sheeli and this is Law Weekly on Channels Television. We begin with news from the Court of Appeal Lagos, which after 14 years freed Major Hamza Al-Mustafa, former Chief Security Officer, to the late Head of State General Sani Abacha. Major Al-Mustafa and one Lateef Shofolaon had been convicted on the 30th of January 2012 by a Lagos High Court on charges of conspiracy and the murder of Alhaja Kudirat Abiola. In a unanimous judgment of the three-man panel of the Court of Appeal last week Friday, both men were acquitted and discharged. The appellate court held that the prosecution failed to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt and consequently quashed the death sentence placed on them by Justice Mojisola Dada of the Lagos High Court. While Al-Mustafa and Shofolaon secured their freedom from the courts, another court was convicting another man. The Federal High Court, sitting in Kano State, northwest Nigeria, last week Friday convicted Aminu Sule Lamido, son of Jigawa State Governor, for transporting the sum of $50,000 to Cairo in Egypt. Justice Fatu Riman, who delivered the judgment, says the accused is expected to forfeit 25% of the total sum of the money he refused to declare to the authorities. Also sentenced and convicted at the Federal High Court in Abuja are 4 Boko Haram members who got life imprisonment for causing the death of several Nigerians through terrorist acts. All 4 men were convicted on terrorism charges and for participating in bombings which occurred in 2011 in Suleja and Dankna village in Buhari, all in Niger State near the Federal Capital Territory. They were also found guilty of offences ranging from illegal trading in arms, transportation of improvised explosive devices, and participating in terrorist activities and bombings. Still on terrorism, the same Federal High Court in Abuja last week Friday rejected the request for bail made by 3 Lebanese businessmen charged with terrorism and illegal possession. Justice Adeniyi Ademola ruled that there is a likelihood that the 3 suspects will not appear for trial because some of the offences they are charged with attract life imprisonment upon conviction. The judge also ruled that the exhibit of arms and ammunition presented by the prosecution as having been recovered from the 3 suspects poses a serious national concern for the country, a situation which relegates their personal liberty. Trial in the case has been fixed for the 29th of July. From terrorism charges to money matters, the former managing director of Intercontinental Bank PLC, Mr. Erastus Akingbola, last week Wednesday, asked the Lagos High Court sitting in Ikeja to quash the charges of stealing about 47.1 billion naira preferred against him by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. His counsel, Mr. Wole Olanipekun, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, told the court presided over by Justice Adeniyi Onigbanjo that the EFCC had no powers to prosecute criminal matters before a state high court without a fiat issued by the state's Attorney General. He also argued that the proof of evidence did not disclose the offense of stealing against his client, adding that this was a sufficient ground to quash the charge. Justice Onigbanjo has fixed Monday, the 15th of July for ruling on the application. And we round off with a protracted dispute between the Nigeria Liquefied and Natural Gas (NLNG) Limited and the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency in Imasa. The Federal High Court in Lagos last week Friday entered an out-of-court settlement agreement between the 2 parties as the consent order of the court. Justice Mohammed Idris gave his note to the agreement after counsel to all the parties in the tax dispute informed the court of the development. In the agreement, NLNG has withdrawn its contempt proceedings, while NIMASA will immediately revoke the detention order of NLNG vessels and release them. The revocation, according to the letter, is subject to NLNG making payment of the $138 million it is owing NIMASA. Welcome back. Last week Friday's release of Major Hamza Al-Mustafa and Alhaji Lateef Shofalawon has predictably begun to generate some reactions. Here's a recap of the court proceedings and a few of the early reactions. This is the jubilation in court that greeted the news of the judgment, which acquitted and discharged the two men. The three justices of the Court of Appeal sitting in Igboshere area of Lagos Island sat at about 10:50 a.m. But long before then, even as early as 8 a.m., supporters and family members of the two men, Major Hamza Al-Mustafa and Alhaji Lateef Shofalawon, had arrived at the court. Both men had been convicted on the 30th of January 2012 by Justice Mojisola Dada of the Lagos High Court for conspiracy and the 1996 murder of Alhaja Kudirat Abiola, wife of late Chief Moshood Abiola, who is widely believed to have won Nigeria's freest and fairest presidential elections in 1993. There are two prominent faces in the crowd here: the leader of the Odua People's Congress, OPC, Dr. Frederick Fasheun, and football coach Fani Amu. Justice Amina Oge presided, while Justice Rita Pemu read the 74-page judgment that lasted over 2 hours. Justice Pemu traced the history of the case and the roles played by the various actors. She raised 3 issues for determination: whether the offense of conspiracy was established against the men in view of the evidence before the court, whether the charge of the murder of Alhaja Kudirat had been made against both men, and whether there was evidence outside that of the 4 prosecution witnesses which suggests that the appellants did not commit the crime. All 3 issues were resolved against the prosecution and in favor of the 2 appellants. The court held that the charge of conspiracy could not be established from mere conjecture, as was done in the instant case. Of special interest to the court was the fact that the bullet which was extracted from the late Alhaja Kudirat was not tendered in court, despite the prosecution having labelled it a special kind of bullet. Justice Pemu held that this was fatal to their case. In the final analysis, the court was of the opinion that the investigation into the murder was shoddy. There were no reliable exhibits, no direct circumstantial evidence, and the evidence of the witnesses were so full of material contradictions which eventually rendered them worthless. The result was that the court held that there were more questions than answers, and when doubts exist, it must be resolved in favor of the accused persons, who were accordingly discharged and acquitted.
Elated because at last, sanity has been brought into the criminal justice system. I am sad, and this is a case of irreversible sadness, because the mother of Major Hamza Al-Mustafa, now late Fatima Al-Mustafa, died because of this judgment. The very day she heard of the judgment to the fact that her son had been condemned to death, she started saying, "So I will not see my son again." She fell ill. She never recovered.
We've been vindicated. We have seen all the lapses, and we didn't know why the lower court had to do what it did. So I'm happy this Court of Appeal is quite meticulous. They've gone into details and they've explained what they have seen, and we believe that has been the position.
In another reaction, Lekon Abiola, the first son of the late Kudirat Abiola, says the appeal court has only completed the work of other courts before it that have played roles in scuttling the family's quest for justice in this matter. And the Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice in Lagos State, Mr. Adekpaye, told Law Weekly that copies of the judgment are yet to be issued by the court, and he will need to study it before making any comments or deciding on the next line of action.
You see, life has just got easier. You stay connected to Channels TV, where news and innovations are shaping our world. Simply log on to channelstv.com to get the breaking news. Browse the homepage according to what matters to you. Tap on the extended coverage of business, sports, politics, lifestyle, infotech, entertainment, health, world news, and lots more. Click on the live link and see the news in real time. Do you want to watch the latest video of the day? It's just a click away. Friend us on Facebook, YouTube, follow us on Twitter, Google+, participate in Channels TV poll and share your comments. It's a website you can talk to. Your voice will be heard. ChannelsTV.com. The news at your fingertips.
From the case of Al Mustafa, we move on to the crisis that played out in the Rivers State House of Assembly last week and the moves by the federal lawmakers to take over the proceedings of the House. I spoke with a senior advocate of Nigeria and Queen's Counsel Fidelis Odita, and here is his perspective on the issue. Let's start with this whole crisis and the twist of violence that we've seen in Rivers State. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's a disgrace that adult men and women are unable to play by simple rules. How can it be difficult for anyone to understand that in any democracy, the will of a majority must prevail? The minority is entitled to be heard, but the minority cannot subvert democracy by usurping the functions of a majority. I don't understand how, for example, 5 lawmakers can claim to impeach a speaker when they have 32 lawmakers and when at least 26 of them are in support of a speaker. It's absolutely disgraceful. And the fact that we're unable to govern ourselves gives me continuing source of worry. How can we bring up people, young people, if we, the adults, cannot lead by example? Why would 5 people think that just because they are supported by whoever, whether it is the president or whether it is the president's wife or whether it is a commissioner of police, that they can take over an assembly, a democratic institution, which is at the heart of our democracy, simply by force? How? Is that responsible leadership?
Do you think the crisis has degenerated to a point where the lawmakers would invoke Section 11, subsection 4 of the Constitution, like they have done, to take over the functions of the Rivers State House of Assembly?
Section 11, subsection 4 says where a state assembly is unable to perform its functions for whatever reason, then the National Assembly may intervene, so long as the state assembly remains unable to perform its functions. But the question whether or not a state assembly is unable to perform its function must be one of degree, I would have thought. It must be a question of fact and degree, because if, for example, an assembly is unable to sit for a week, does it mean that Section 11.4 is engaged? Does it mean it's unable to perform its functions? If it's unable to sit for 4 weeks, does it mean it's unable to perform its function? If there was a fight once or twice in the assembly, does that mean that the assembly was unable to perform its function? The way that I read the intervention of the House of Representatives is that they wanted to protect the governor from a possible impeachment by 5 people backed by state machinery, namely police force, the armed forces. That's the way I read it. In that sense, of course, they were intervening to protect the institutions of democracy in the state and to prevent the degeneration of a situation in Rivers State. I don't think that they were doing that so as to curtail the powers of the state assembly.
So you think that it was a proper intervention?
I don't think it's a proper intervention. I think that they might have what may seem to them to be good reasons. They do not want a situation to happen, something we witnessed under President Obasanjo, where 2 people will impeach a governor in an assembly made up of 30 people. I mean, that was a complete disgrace as well, and an utter joke, and the court corrected them. But what I'm surprised by is the fact that these 5 dissident members of the Rivers State Assembly seem not to have learned anything from the rich jurisprudence that President Obasanjo gave us. For example, the Darie case, the Ladoja case, the attempt to remove Obi. There are so many cases where 5 people or minority members of a state assembly have tried to remove the governor. And in each of them, the Supreme Court ruled that the removal was unlawful. I do not see how 5 people can impeach Amechi, but I suppose there is a small gap in that jurisprudence, namely that when a governor is impeached unlawfully, he remains de facto out of office. And because in the Ladoja case, the Supreme Court said there was no power to elongate the tenure, it means that if you're able to delay the proceedings sufficiently, the governor must just find that although he has been unlawfully impeached, in fact, he's been prevented factually from exercising the functions of a governor until his tenure expires, and there is no power in anyone else to extend his tenure. I suspect that that is what they're trying to do, but that would be a complete negation of democracy.
How long can the National Assembly take over the functions of the Rivers State House of Assembly?
Section 11, subsection 4 does not prescribe a fixed term for them to intervene in any state assembly. It says as long as the state assembly is unable to perform its functions. And in subsection 5, it says the state assembly is unable to perform its function as long as it is unable to meet. So in theory, the intervention could be indefinite.
Subject to their interpretation.
Subject to the interpretation of inability to meet. If, for example, somewhere were to hijack the maze, it seems likely that they will be unable to meet. Similarly, if the state's security operatives, the police, the SSS, the JTF, or whatever they call them, were to prevent the majority members of the assembly, a matter which would be utterly disgraceful and unlawful, nonetheless, they will be unable to meet because the assembly has been barricaded. They are unable to meet somewhere. Of course, they don't have to sit physically in the assembly. Wherever they have their maze, they can constitute as their assembly for the time being and perform their functions. And so long as they have custody of their maze.
I've seen happening in a few instances.
In a few instances, I dare say that they should be able to meet. But I don't accept that simply because of what happened on Tuesday and on Monday as well in Port Harcourt, that the Rivers State House of Assembly is unable to meet or to perform its functions. On the contrary, I'm aware that the 26 members later came back to the Assembly and passed the amendment to the State Appropriation Law.
Now, from some of the commentaries on this issue, some people have the opinion that this again brings to fore the role of the police and the calls for state policing. Do you think that if there was state police in Rivers State, this situation would have been better handled?
Well, I think if we had a state police, Amechi would be protected by his own state police. I don't see any circumstance where the commissioner of police appointed by him would prevent him or the majority lawmakers from conducting peaceful deliberations in the state assembly. So to that extent, the state police would have served him better. But that is solely because the police itself, whether it is state or federal, is not independent. It's susceptible to political influence, whether that influence is exercised by the state governor or by the president. He who pays the piper dictates the tunes. That's exactly what would have happened. I don't see that that justifies the call for state police by itself. But I do not think that some of the arguments against the police are well-founded. Why should President Jonathan control the police force? He doesn't seem to have shown greater judgment than anyone else in the crisis that engulfed the Governors Forum or Rivers State. If we're able to entrust national police or the federal police to him, Why can't we entrust it to a governor? In what respect is he better than any governor? Indeed, better than anyone else. So I don't see that. Of course, one could say that the national police is a unifying factor, but we see the national police abused all the time by sitting presidents. We saw the abuse of the police during President Obasanjo's tenure, 5 people removing a governor, and then as soon as that happens, the police intervenes and arrest the governor, and the governor is taken to prison. That is a complete abuse of power, and we must condemn such abusive use of the police.
So how do we get the kind of police force that is independent of all this?
I think our institutions are all extremely weak. I would even say that they are almost Mickey Mousey. The police, the prisons, immigrations, customs, even the judiciary. Show me any Nigerian institution that is not weak. Show me a single Nigerian institution that is not susceptible to political influence. Show me a single Nigerian institution that is independent and strong. Just one. Show me. You might say, well, the National Assembly, especially the House of Reps, maybe. But those are major organs of the state. And if the National Assembly were to be under anyone's influence, then we'll be in real trouble. But I'm extremely worried that instead of trying to build our institutions so as to strengthen our democracy and ensure that our democracy is rooted in the rule of law, we are doing everything, especially those in power, claiming to exercise power in our name, and doing everything possible to weaken those institutions and to bring them to their knees. In fact, to pocket them.
So the question then is, how do we get strong institutions?
By ensuring that our votes actually count. Because I see many of these problems to lack of genuine democracy, lack of accountability on the part of people who exercise power in our names. If we ensure that our votes count, and therefore that these people are politically accountable to us, and that we use our power to hire and fire them, then you would see that they will respect the rules of the engagement, then they will respect our wishes. They won't just help themselves to the Commonwealth, which belongs to all of us, by paying themselves ridiculous amounts under various names, and by ensuring that those people who are appointed to all these bodies are people who are fit for it. But Nigeria is the only place I know where almost everything people lobby. You lobby to be a judge. You lobby to be a minister. You lobby to be this. You lobby to be that. There is absolutely no merit. But you cannot make progress just based on lobbying. You cannot choose 11 people who have lobbied to represent your national football team and expect them to win. It's impossible. You've got to try and get your best. You may not always get your best because it may be debatable what is best. But generally, you'll be able to determine that for a substantial number of people that these are the very best people you have. But where you use very weak people and put them in positions of authority, the institutions are going to continue to be very weak.
That's the much we can take on this episode of Law Weekly. There'll be a fresh package of the program next week, and you can watch all the episodes of the program by going to YouTube/channels web. I'm Shola Sheyeli. Thank you for watching.